Magid, and this is Doing Tech Right, a podcast from ConnectSafely, where we and our guests speak about parenting, tech, and related topics, along with strategies and policies to make tech safer and more civil. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe and visit us at ConnectSafely.org. So once again, I'm with Kerry Gallagher, who's the ConnectSafely Education Director and also is the Assistant Principal for Teaching and Learning. I hope I'm getting your title right, at a school that serves both middle school and high school boys, and is, by the way, the mother of two teenage girls. And the reason I bring up Kerry's credentials, and she has many more credentials, including a law degree and you name it, but the reason I bring them up is that you're doing every single day, both as a parent and as an educator, dealing with teenagers who are using AI, both for personal and educational purposes. And so I can't think of anyone better than our own colleague, Kerry Gallagher, to address the issues that both parents and educators are struggling with as kids go back to school this year. It's certainly not the first year that AI has been available, but it's one of the first. And as has always been the case for the last 2 or 3 years, a year where we've seen an amazing amount of progress, an amazing amount of development, and I might add, a fairly significant backlash. I'm hearing a lot of concerns. I'm actually hearing about committees that are forming in some school districts demanding that the school board ban AI. And so I want to address all those issues, the positives, the risks, and what's the sensible policy for districts, educators, and parents to agree on.
Yeah, I was on a call earlier today for my job at the school that you mentioned, and someone on the call called it a techlash. So it's a backlash against tech, and we were talking about the impact of that on our teachers and how they're feeling about the work that they do, on parents and what they're expressing to us, and even on students. And I know you've done a lot of work yourself, Larry, listening to young people about their own feelings about how technology and AI are impacting their learning and development.
And some of them are very concerned. A lot of things, including the environmental stuff, which we might touch on, but it mostly how it going to impact them as learners and ultimately as members of the workforce. So let's start out, Kerry, a little bit about your own experience. As I mentioned, you're an educator and a parent. Tell me a little about how AI has played a role in your work and especially the work of your students and your own kids.
Sure. That 22-23 school year was the school year during which ChatGPT sort of created a public-facing free product for people to use. And that was the first time, it wasn't the first time that AI became available to the public, but it was the first time generative AI became available in the form that we now know and love, or maybe we have different emotions than love. That was the first school year in which I saw some impact happening on me and my students professionally in the ways that we're really talking about in this back to school version of our conversation. And in addition to my role as an administrator who leads the amazing team that does work on teaching and learning, I have the amazing opportunity that I get to still teach one class. And the class I was teaching at the time was a world history class. And that was the first time that I had a student utilize AI to carry out an assignment without my permission. And it was not an assignment for which my intention was for students to use AI as an aid. And the way he used it was not aligned with the learning goal that we had. In other words, he had it write a couple of paragraphs for him. And part of the way he was being assessed was the way he was able to construct his thoughts into paragraph form. And so he was violating the academic integrity. And so that was the first time I saw that happen way back in, I think it was like early spring, late winter of 2023. Since then, we've come a very long way at my school, and we have purchased licenses for very secure artificial intelligence tools that were intentionally designed for K-12 environments, for teachers to create very structured chatbots for students to work with that align to the assessment intentions of a particular activity or task. And we're providing professional learning for teachers who are actually utilizing AI in the classroom with students. So they're using AI to design images, to design sound. They're using it to do research and work through text. and lots of different functions. And so we started from the very beginning, just like everybody else, and we've progressed to where we are, and we know that we still have work to do because, as you mentioned in your intro, just the headlines around the shifts that the tech companies are seeing in their own AI models are demonstrating quite obviously that this is not slowing down in its development. And so it's demanding that we continue to evolve our practices so that our students are, tooled up with the skills they need to use these tools and are able to continue learning as it develops through their own lives beyond, the K-12 environment as well.
So am I correct in assuming from what you said that at least within the classroom, you're not using generic tools like ChatGPT and Gemini, or are you using both those and the more professionally tuned tools?
Yeah, great question. Most of the commercially available AI models are not secure in the way that they use data based on what K-12 environments are required to abide by. So we have additional, more secure requirements for protecting student data. And so we cannot use the free commercially available version of ChatGPT because the inputs that students would provide to the model would be stored by the model to help train it for future use, and children's data cannot be stored in that way legally.
When the children get home, obviously you can't keep them from using ChatGPT or Gemini, but are your tools available for them to use at home as well, or are they likely to go off and use the more generic tools?
So both. Yes, the tools that we provide as a school are available for them to use at home, and the teachers can choose whether those uses are toggled on and off. So there can be time constraints. So a teacher can say, I've toggled this on so you can use it from home, or I've toggled this off so this is only available when we're in the classroom together. So that's possible. But the truth is that, like any generation of teens or adolescents, they want to use what the adults use. And so there isn't anything that we can do to stop them from using the more commercially available free tools once they leave our supervision or our more secured network.
Another comment I want to make and get your feedback is, I'm old enough to remember having studied before there were calculators and how I struggled with long division. And I understand that if you're teaching, let's say, basic arithmetic to elementary school students, it makes sense to say, no, you're not allowed to use a calculator because we want you to be able to add and subtract and multiply and divide or whatever it is you're trying to teach. But if you're teaching statistics, calculus, advanced mathematics, long ago, I know when my children were in high school, they had access to calculators. In fact, the school recommended specific calculators that they buy for their math classes. Do you see a similar model when it comes to AI where you make it, depending upon the nature of the task, you either use it or don't use it?
Yeah, I think that's one way to think about it from an instructional perspective. And it is something that I was just talking about earlier today in terms of the vision that we're moving toward with the proficiency of the administrators and teachers at the school where I work. Now that they've had sufficient professional learning to help them understand what AI is, like, it isn't a magic box. It is something that was programmed and developed for a specific task. And so it has, great power, but it also has great limitations. And now that they understand how all of that works under the hood, they also have developed more of an awareness of the skills that are required in order to use that tool properly. So to draw the parallel to what you just mentioned with the calculator, we teach basic arithmetic to young children before we give them access to a calculator so that they understand when they punch in the numbers and symbols in a calculator, they understand what the calculator is doing. It isn't just magic. In the same way, teachers, let's say a teacher of biology, is an expert at the study of biology before they're plopped into the classroom to break down this very complex subject for young learners. We should be training teachers, maybe not to the level of the expertise that the developers have, but to a certain level of expertise as to what AI does and how it's built and what its functionality is, so that they can break that down into scaffolded skills that they can teach their students to master, so that when they do get access to AI, they have the necessary skills to use it properly.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And, going back to your comment earlier about, you found that early in the AI kind of rollout, you found a student using it to write paragraphs and you felt that was inappropriate because you were trying to evaluate in part how well they could write. What if this were, let's say, an AP, I don't know, history class, and the student wanted to use AI to maybe polish their work, to maybe make it struggle with, they're struggling with a paragraph. Maybe it could be said better, but they still have the basic knowledge behind it. At what point does even that become acceptable?
Yeah, I think it depends on the teacher, and it depends on the learning goal of the specific task. It also depends on which AP class you're talking about, right? Like you said AP history.
I didn't say English.
You said you didn't say English, right?
No.
So what's ironic is one of the first AI tools that we adopted as a school was a tool for AP history classes that does exactly what you just said. And we adopted that back in 2023. It was the first AI tool that we adopted because our teachers of the AP history classes, so in our case, it's AP US history, AP European history, they wanted their students to be able to get more frequent feedback on their practice writing for the AP exam than they were capable of providing as a human. Humans, we can only read so many essays and grade so many essays per day because of whatever additional workload we have, because of our obligations to our families, because of our need for rest, both cognitively and physically. And they wanted their students to be able to practice as often as they like and get feedback from an AI tool that was specifically programmed in a very narrow way to give feedback on that type of writing based on the scoring of the AP exam. So I think in that particular example, that's one in which it might be permissible, but it would be different than if the exam is the AP English language exam in which the craft of your writing is precisely what you're being scored on. You don't want to have AI crafting your writing for you because the craft of your writing is the subject.
So what I'm assuming is if a student were to do this, either a paragraph or two, or perhaps illegitimately, in my opinion, the entire essay, which I hope students don't do, and I hope that teachers are able to figure that out if they do. But I have to say that not only are the tools making it easier to make it look like it's not AI, but students probably can very cleverly do it in ways that would make it very difficult to detect that it's AI. So I'm just thinking, we can have all the tools out there we want to try to catch kids from doing it. But at the end of the day, I suspect they'll figure out ways to get around that. It's out there, it's tempting, it's easy to use, it produces good material. I mean, I can imagine students are going to want to try to use it.
I'm really glad we're past the stage of our AI journey at my school in which teachers are leaning into AI detectors, so to speak, right? Quote unquote, AI detectors. For a short period of time, that was something that people were pretty excited about because they thought that was the solution. And then they learned that those AI detectors are rather inaccurate or unreliable. And our students also learned exactly how to trick them. They learned that you can have the AI provide an output that is the assignment and then change, however many 10% of the sentences.
Take out the M dashes. That's the first thing.
Right.
Get rid of the M dashes.
I actually saw a slide recently on a presentation, and at the bottom, there was like a footnote that said all M dashes were inputted by a human.
I've been using M dashes ever since I started writing, and now I don't use them anymore for that reason.
So that particular presenter really loves their M dashes and wanted to make sure that folks knew that all M dashes in the presentation were intentionally entered by a human.
Give us back our M dashes.
I thought that was a nice approach. So remove the M dashes, edit 10% of the sentences, and the AI detectors might not be able to pick it up. And so you're good. It's still editing 10% of an already existing generated essay is much easier than writing it from scratch. And so for students, that was the hack. I don't know that there's a specific way that works in all subject areas for all teachers in order to prevent this. I think it depends on the type of assignment. It depends on the subject area of the teacher. It depends on the grade level and how advanced the assignment is. But there are lots of different approaches that can be used in different places. And the spectrum goes all the way from like everything has to be done in writing in front of me in class, and there is no written homework, or there is no homework to produce any kind of like physical or typed work or drawn, right, work, all the way to teachers having a few of those assignments done at the start of the year so that they get to the point where they're able to see the students' style and form of their writing, or the style and form of the music they produce, the style and form of the art they produce. And then they allow them to use AI so that they have like a baseline comparison of student generated work that they can compare it to future work. And if the progress is made too quickly, or if the style is sufficiently different, they're able to have that comparative conversation and be like, this looks so different from this. And I saw you do this in person in front of me. Can you explain how you got to this?
Right.
Because I'd love to know a little bit more about your process. And that way you're not throwing accusations at the student, but you're having a productive conversation about their learning process.
So to turn this discussion around a little bit, obviously one of the purposes of school is to train people to function outside of school and, as in the workplace or wherever their future destiny is. I was recently speaking to a friend who works for the legal department of a large tech company, and she was told that they are encouraged, in fact, almost required to use AI. And if they don't use AI, and apparently there's some kind of AI detection to make sure they're using it. And if they don't do AI, that's a negative to them, that they're less likely to get promoted or pay raise or whatever. And I get that, because the company is looking for increased efficiency and they want to squeeze the most productivity they can out of their employees. And in fact, that's the world that your students are going to be entering. So the question I struggle with is, if we discourage AI, are we actually doing a disservice? Or if we over restrict AI, knowing that in fact at some point they're going to be required to or expected to be using AI, or at least be as productive as their colleagues who are using AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think all students should have the opportunity to develop the skills that will make them effective users of artificial intelligence. And what the building of those skills looks like is going to differ based on the grade level, based on the subject area, based on the school and its mission. But I think all students deserve the opportunity to develop those skills so that they're prepared for the workplace that will exist when they get there. And it might be that they're going to be in the workplace next month, or it might be in 20 years, depending on where they are in their academic journey. But they all deserve the right to develop those skills. I don't know that means we have to be talking about all AI or no AI. I think there's an in-between that is a much healthier conversation. But here's the thing, it's a much harder conversation.
Right.
Because the in-between is a big area, and exactly where that is, there is no right answer for all students all the time.
So that brings me to a question that I was going to ask you anyway. I live in Silicon Valley, and maybe despite or because of where I live, parents are very focused on AI. And there's a committee in my town that is pressuring the school board to ban AI in schools. And I'm going to be having a conversation with some of those committee members very soon. And I'm wondering, how should I respectfully hear them? What should I ask them? And more importantly, maybe more importantly, but certainly as important, is what can I do to reassure them that maybe there is some kind of middle ground that will work?
I'm famous for this line at the school where I work, because part of my job is to answer questions. So I get asked hundreds of questions a day. And many times when the questions are very broad, like, why don't you just ban AI? Or why do you allow students to have phones at this school? Or, why are some of their assignments online when it could be done on paper, right? My follow-up, this is the question I'm famous for, is always, tell me more about that question. Tell me why you're asking. Like, what have you seen or heard or experienced? And that always reveals a little bit more that helps me answer their question. Because rather than assume that I know the reason behind their question and providing answers that either don't answer it, or providing answers that open up a whole other area of concern that they haven't considered yet and exacerbate the conversation, it's better for me to learn precisely where the concern comes from. So that would be my start, because it could come from a concern about the environmental impact of data centers.
Right.
Or it could come from a concern about the AI powered algorithms that are serving up content that children don't look for and that is potentially causing harm to them on social media. And those are two very different AI driven concerns, right?
Right.
So I would want to learn more.
So having said that, and that's excellent, and actually it's going to lead me to a question that I'm about to ask about personal use of AI. In school, can you assure them that the AI is being used for appropriate educational purposes and that it's going to enable, actually help empower the learning, as opposed to, I think one of the fears is, we're giving these kids crutches, we're giving them shortcuts, we're not teaching them how to do the hard work. How are you going to reassure them that, yes, indeed, your students are learning what they need to be learning, and AI may actually be enhancing that as opposed to inhibiting it?
Yeah, if their concern is related to the potential negative impact on or harmful impact on learning, right? Then I would say that's a question that we're grappling with too, of course, as professional educators. And it's really important that we're all grappling with it together.
Mm-hmm.
And as a school, we have done a tremendous amount of work providing our teachers with professional learning so that they understand what AI is, how it works, and how it might impact the learning of their students. We've also spent money on purchasing tools that are specifically designed for the K-12 environment so that our teachers are able to fine tune any AI tools that they very intentionally choose so that they act in a way that is appropriate for both the subject matter and the developmental ability of the children in front of them. That being said, no educator is required to use AI for a certain number of lessons per year. We need to make sure that teachers get the adequate training and capacity building that they need before we put any kinds of expectations like that in place.
It's funny you say that. I'm thinking, so it reminds me of an athletic program. You wouldn't put a kid on the football field if the coach didn't have proper training on how to make sure that they played the game as safely as possible.
Right.
And so in a sense, that's what you're talking about. If well-trained educators are going to do what they can to make sure that the technology is being used appropriately, just like good coaches are going to do what they can to make sure that the kids aren't injured in the game. At least we reduce the probability of they're being injured. Can't guarantee.
Yeah. Right. And all of the teachers that I work with are teachers because they love learning. And so they're going to want healthy, productive learning to happen in the classroom because they became teachers because they love learning themselves. They like to be with the kids of the age that they've chosen to teach. And they have a passion for the content area for which they've become licensed to teach. And so they want effective, positive learning to happen in the classroom just as much as the parents do for their individual child. That teacher wants that for all of the children that they serve.
So let's switch gears for a moment. And with both your educator and parent hat on, let's talk about the non-school uses of AI. First of all, what should educators be doing to help their students understand how to use AI in their personal lives? And what should parents be doing? And I'm thinking about things like, as you alluded to earlier, sometimes AI can send you down a rabbit hole. There have been rare but tragic cases where AI has led to self-harm and even suicide. And as I wrote recently on Connect Safely, and I think, Kerry, you put something on social media about my article about empathy, about how AI can be used as a substitute for human interaction, empathy, sympathy. We're outsourcing some of our emotional responses. Talk a little bit about the role of parents and educators in helping young people use AI more effectively and more safely in their own personal lives.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with educators. One thing that educators can do is when they send their students home to study or to do homework, part of the assignment instruction should include instructions for effective uses of AI to carry out that studying or homework task and ineffective uses of AI. So the instructions need to explicitly go through, what is a good way for you to use AI if you choose to at home when you're doing this and what are not. And that's, I think, already part of the responsibility of teachers for all assignments, whether the assignment gets done in the classroom or at home. But that is, I think, a fair expectation to put upon teachers if they have had the professional learning to build their capacity, like I mentioned before. As for parents, We have said for a long time at Connect Safely that modeling is one of the first and most important things that we can do when it comes to teaching our children how to use technology in a healthy way. And so when we choose to use AI in our personal lives, it's great if you could talk through with your kids what you're doing, how you're doing it, or show them how you did it, and give examples in whatever ways that you choose to do it in your personal life. And I think there's lots of examples of what, like, today is my husband and my anniversary, our wedding anniversary. And thank you. And we were trying to come up with ways to celebrate that were inexpensive. We have some large expenses that we've had to pay for recently, and mostly related to our children. and so we were trying to come up with a way to do it cheap. And ChatGPT helped me a great deal. And we came up with an idea that we're really looking forward to for tonight. And it's something that I'm pretty excited about. And I started with a very general question, and I slowly narrowed the parameters. And that is a thread with ChatGPT that I would happily show my children as an example of how to come up with an idea for, and narrow it. I know lots of people use AI in their personal lives to come up with ideas for vacations or trips or day trips, trying to find new places to go that they've never been before, trying to help them understand something that they've never encountered before, maybe with a symptom, knowing that they're going to go talk to a doctor, but at least to educate themselves a little bit initially before they go and see their medical professional. And so you want to make the most of that time. So you want to go in prepared. So that's another example of your ability to use AI. What if you need step-by-step instructions to learn how to change the oil of your car, right? What if there's all kinds of different ways that we can use it. I think modeling that is really helpful. And also modeling the step of doing some lateral reading or lateral corroboration. So once you get an answer from ChatGPT, just check with a couple of other online sources, trusted websites or reliable websites, to make sure that that sounds right before taking action on it.
The other thing I often do, if I ask AI a question and for some reason I'm a little suspicious, I'll say, "Are you sure?" And it will go back and do deeper research and very often say, "No, I was mistaken." And it will give me a correct answer the second time. But again, never act on it without doing the lateral research that you're talking about from a reputable source that you can trust.
Yeah, that lateral checking is important for any kind of research that we do, whether it's using an AI model or, any other website. We should never rely on you should never just rely on one source for an important piece of information that you're going to act on. I love the "Are you sure?" prompt, because I was going to mention something similar, which is, what have we not talked about that's related to this? Or what considerations or factors have I not mentioned, or have you not mentioned in helping make this decision? Because again, just like the "Are you sure?" prompt, that what have we left out of our conversation is going to force it to go back and do deeper research and present you with things that you likely hadn't thought of.
Right. And again, you can, if it doesn't give you the sources, you can ask for the sources. And sometimes the sources are very flimsy, just because it's a source. I mean, it could be some essay it picked up on a blog, but you have to really examine the credibility of the sources themselves.
The other thing is that sometimes I've asked for sources, and the sources it gives me don't actually say what the AI model has interpreted them to say. Right. And so I've gone back and been like, this source does not say that. Like, how did you interpret that from this source? Help me understand. And then it'll sometimes say, "Oh yeah, you're right, it doesn't."
So pure experience, because I've never taken a class in AI, maybe I should, or maybe you and I should teach one, I'm not sure. Maybe we're doing that right now, actually. But just from experience, I've learned that how you ask the question is very important. First of all, you can introduce bias if you were to ask it in a way like, tell me all the reasons why I should vote for XYZ. You're going to get a very positive picture of that candidate. And if you tell me all the reasons I shouldn't vote for them, you're going to get a very negative. So how you ask questions to make sure you're getting the best possible answer, I find, is very important. And again, I've just learned it with trial and error, but I'm wondering if that's something that you guys are teaching.
Yeah, that's often commonly called prompt engineering.
Yes.
Yeah, and it certainly is something that is one of the really important skills that, when I mentioned AI skills that we need to be teaching students from a younger age, how to ask questions the right way so that you get the answer that you want. If you want a biased answer, you should ask a biased question.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't, you need to ask the question differently.
Or an ambiguous question. So I'll give an example. When I first started using AI, I was in the market for a grill, a home indoor grill, and I wanted the timer that would shut it off automatically because I'm notorious for forgetting to turn things off. And I said, show me grills with timers. And it showed me a bunch of one, and I ordered one, and it came, and indeed it had a timer, but all it did was ring a bell at the end. I wanted one that shut it off. So then I had to go back after returning it to Amazon and say, show me grills that have timers that will shut the grill off after a specified period of time. Then I got the right information. So you have to sometimes be precise.
Another thing that we can model both for our students as teachers and for our children as parents is returning to try the different AI tools that are available relatively regularly because they are developing so quickly.
Yeah.
And I have found that many of the specialized or add-on tools that have been supplementally added to Gemini have been really incredible.
Yes.
Like I have created a whole digital activity for my students that we haven't used yet because I just created it, that I'm planning to roll out next semester based on the Canvas tool that is built into Gemini.
Mm-hmm.
There's in Notebook, which is an AI tool also from Google. There's the ability to create a custom podcast. And if you don't like the first version, you can give it feedback and it will recreate it. It can create instructional videos. It can create graphic organizers. Those are all very different things for very different purposes. And I have found all of those tools to be useful. And I continue to enjoy going back to all these models and seeing how they improve. And I also subscribe to newsletters that give me updates as to what the improvements are, the updates to each of the major models, so that when I get that in my inbox, I'm like, ooh, that sounds fun. I'm going to go and try Claude to see about that new update,
exactly.
right? Or I'm going to go and try ChatGPT to see that new update, or Gemini, or any of the others.
Claude does an amazing job developing Excel spreadsheets that are far more complicated than I could ever develop on my own. And of course, Gemini does a really good job developing Google spreadsheets. So anybody who's struggled with spreadsheets and wants to do something much more sophisticated than they thought they could do can now do them with a few simple prompts. And that brings me to what I think is my final question before I open up some ideas to you, because you kind of alluded to it a minute ago. How can we use AI not to replace critical thinking, but to improve our ability to be critical thinkers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think early on, we thought that AI would be really helpful in helping us come up with ideas. So my anniversary example is a good example of that. It was helping me come up with ideas that were something we could do together that would be meaningful, but that would not cost us a lot of money. And it did successfully. But there was research that came out in May or June of this year in which they surveyed the folks who are part of the enrollment and admissions management teams at universities and colleges about the essays that were parts of applications that they were receiving from high school applicants. And this was a longitudinal research. So it wasn't just this cycle that they had asked them about. They had been asking them about the last few cycles. And this is helpful data for college admissions consultants and high school guidance counselors who are advising students on how to construct their college application so that it gives them, the best advantage. College applications and college admissions are more competitive than they've ever been, right, today.
Right.
So, but one of the things that came out of this study that was so interesting is that college admissions counselors are reporting that admissions essays are more well written. So they're higher quality writing with more colorful language than ever before. But the topics on which students are speaking have narrowed significantly. There are very few unique topics.
Interesting.
And so what that tells me is a lot of people have assumed that the way AI can help us with critical thinking is that it can help us with the brainstorm process, help us come up with things that we wouldn't come up with on our own. The problem is that if all of us are using AI to brainstorm, the the topics that are the most popular, that are picked the most, become the ones that are most commonly in the output of the brainstorm. And so we actually are getting fewer unique topics from our AI brainstorms. Yeah. So as a result of that particular research, in addition to conversations I've had with teachers that I work with, because many of them were like, that rings true to me. Like, when my students use AI to help them come up with ideas when they have the freedom to choose their own topic, I find that I get more on the same topics than if they don't use AI and they truly stretch themselves to come up with the idea themselves. And so I think one thing to know is that brainstorming might not be the answer to that question, that in terms of how it can enhance critical thinking. But I do think it can help us at least get started with understanding topics that we know nothing about. Similar to like what a Wikipedia article could do, right? It can help you get some of the basics about a topic for which you know nothing, but then just like you have to leave Wikipedia behind and then do the deep research on your own, you may have to leave the AI model behind and do the deeper research in which the deeper critical thinking happens on your own. That might be where we are right now.
The brainstorming makes absolute sense what you're saying, because exactly that, if you start outsourcing idea generation, you're going to wind up getting, as you point out, the more popular ideas as opposed to your unique ideas, which is really what authorship is all about. Frankly, the most important thing that an author does is decide on what he or she is going to write about.
Well, and what an AI model doing is predicting the most likely answer that you want. And that prediction is based on patterns of other users. Yeah. And it's taking the most popular answers and serving those up to you first. So if you really want to brainstorm that's outside of what others have done and it is truly unique, an AI model might not be the place to ask that question.
And I used a real intelligent source to come up with the idea for this podcast. I was talking to my wife and I said, what do you think of some good ideas for my column tomorrow morning that I have to write in a podcast that I might want to do? And she said, well, it's back to school season. How are people using AI? And that came from a human being. I'm not sure.
Human intelligence at its best.
Real intelligence, decades of wisdom. So it cannot replace human beings in any way, shape, or form. It can enhance what we do any more than a power tool can replace a great carpenter, but it can make the carpenter's job a lot easier than using a handsaw. And that's kind of I know that's not 100% accurate metaphor, but I like to use it. Kerry, anything else we should add before we wrap up?
One thing I would add for both concerned teachers and concerned parents is that we're all in the messy middle of this. It's developing as we're recording this podcast, and it will be more developed by the time you publish this recording.
Right.
And so having all of the answers is not realistic, and thinking that an absolute all learning should happen with AI or no learning should happen with AI is the answer is probably not the right answer, because it is omnipresent. None of us really have the choice as to whether we can use AI. It's already built into so many things that we do. What is best is for us to learn the skills we need to use it well at whatever pace works for us so that we can participate in the society that we're building together.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It is literally, we don't have to do AI. We live in a sea of it, and almost any device you buy in the future is going to have AI embedded into it, whether you want to use it or not. So good point. And I think you've answered my question as to what I could say to these folks in my town who want to ban AI. And I think the answer is let's work together to find ways to use it safely and appropriately and in ways that enhance learning and maintain our humanity. And recognize the fact we are in the messy middle. We are in a rapidly evolving world, and it's exciting and a little bit scary, but more exciting to me than scary. Kerry, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Larry.
Doing Tech Right is produced by Christopher Lee. Maureen Cochan is executive producer. Theme music by Will Magid. I'm Larry Magid.